The Book of Ezra is a book of the Hebrew Bible that formerly included the Book of Nehemiah in a single book, usually referred to in scholarship as Ezra-Nehemiah. The two books were separated by the first printed rabbinical Bibles of the early 16th century, following the late medieval Latin Christian tradition. Composed in Hebrew and Aramaic, it is dedicated to the return to Zion after the end of the Babylonian captivity. Together with the Book of Nehemiah, it forms the final chapter in the historical narrative of the Hebrew Bible. The Book of Ezra is divided into two parts. The first tells the story of the first return of the exiles in the first year of Cyrus the Great's reign 538 before Christ and the completion and dedication of the new temple in Jerusalem in the 6th year of Darius I's reign 515 before Christ. The second tells of Ezra's subsequent mission to Jerusalem and his struggle to purify the Jews from intermarriage with Gentiles. In the book's recurring narrative pattern, the God of Israel 3 times inspires a Persian king to appoint a leader from among the Jews to fulfill a mission. The first is to rebuild the temple, the second is to purify the Jewish community, and the third is to wall off the holy city. This third mission, that of Nehemiah, is not part of the Book of Ezra. There is no historical consensus regarding the existence or mission of Ezra due to a lack of extra-biblical evidence and conflicting scholarly interpretations, ranging from viewing him as a historical Aramaic official to a literary figure, with debates surrounding the authenticity of Artaxerxes' rescript and its dating. In the early 6th century before Christ, the kingdom of Judah rebelled against the Neo-Babylonian Empire and was destroyed. As a result, the royal court, priests, prophets, and scribes were taken captive to the city of Babylon. There, a profound intellectual revolution took place, with the exiles blaming their fate on disobedience to their God and looking forward to a future when God would allow a purified people to return to Jerusalem and rebuild the temple in Jerusalem. The same period saw the rapid rise of Persia, previously a minor kingdom in what is now southern Iran, to a position of great power, and in 539 before Christ, King Cyrus II, the Persian ruler, conquered Babylon. It is difficult to describe the parties and politics of Judea during this period due to the lack of historical sources, but there seem to have been 3 major groups. The returnees from exile who claimed restoration with the support of Cyrus II, the opponents of Judah and Benjamin, and a third group, the people of the land, who appear to have been local opposition to the returnees who built the temple in Jerusalem. The single Hebrew book of Ezra-Nehemiah, entitled Ezra, was translated into Greek around the middle of the 2nd century BC. The Septuagint calls Ezra, Nehemiah and 1 Ezra, respectively, Ezra B and A. This usage was noted by the early Christian scholar Origen, who noted that the Hebrew book of Ezra could be considered a doubled book. Jerome, writing in the early 5th century, notes that this duplication has since been adopted by Greek and Latin Christians. Jerome himself rejects the duplication in his translation of the Bible from Hebrew into Latin through the Vulgate. Consequently, all early Vulgate manuscripts present Ezra and Nehemiah as one book. From the 9th century onwards, Latin Bibles were discovered which for the first time separated the Ezra and Nehemiah sections of Ezra-Nehemiah as 2 separate books, then called 1st and 2nd Ezra. This became standard in the Paris Bibles of the 13th century. It was not until 1516, in the first printed rabbinical Bible of Daniel Bomberg, that the division was introduced generally into Hebrew Bibles. Cyrus of Ezra 1 verse 1 is called King of Persia, a title introduced by Cyrus the Great sometime after he defeated Astyages of Mede 585 to 550 before Christ. Scholars are divided on the chronological order of Ezra and Nehemiah's actions. Ezra 7 verse 8 says that Ezra arrived in Jerusalem in the 7th year of King Artaxerxes, while Nehemiah 2 verses 1 to 9 states that Nehemiah arrived in the 20th year of Artaxerxes. If this was Artaxerxes I, 465 to 424 before Christ, then Ezra arrived in for 58 before Christ and Nehemiah in for 45 before Christ. Nehemiah 8 to 9, where the two, possibly due to an editorial error, appear together, supports this scenario. The content of Ezra-Nehemiah is structured in theological rather than chronological order. First the temple must be set up, then the purification of the community, then the building of the outer walls of the city, and so finally everything can reach a grand climax in the reading of the law. The narrative follows a recurring pattern in which the God of Israel incites the Persian king to authorize a Jewish leader, Zerubbabel, Ezra, Nehemiah, to undertake a mission. The leader carries out his mission despite opposition, and the success is marked by a great assembly. The tasks of the three leaders are progressive. First the temple is rebuilt, Zerubbabel, then the community of Israel, Ezra, and finally the walls that will separate the purified community and temple from the outside world, Nehemiah. The pattern is completed with a final coda in which Nehemiah restores faith in Yahweh. This concern with schematic pattern making rather than history in the modern sense of factually describing events in the order in which they occurred explains the origin of the many problems that surround both Ezra and Nehemiah as historical sources. 20th century views on the composition of Ezra have revolved around whether the author was Ezra himself, who may have also authored the books of Chronicles, or whether it was another author or authors who also wrote Chronicles. More recently, it has been increasingly recognized that Ezra, Nehemiah, and Chronicles have an extremely complex history spanning many stages of redaction, and most scholars are now wary of accepting a single composition with a unified theology and perspective. As an indication of the many layers of redaction that Ezra underwent, a recent study finds that Ezra 1 to 6 and Ezra 9 to 10 were originally separate documents, that they were later joined together by the authors of Ezra 7 to 8, and that they all underwent extensive later redaction. Tamara Kon Eskenazi argues that the final composition of Ezra occurred during the late Persian period, 370 to 350 before Christ, with some minor additions from the Hellenistic period. She states that the language and ideology of the book seem to fit best within the context of the Persian period. The oldest surviving manuscript of Ezra is for Q Ezra, also called for Q117, which contains Ezra for verses 2 to 6, 9 to 11, 5:17, 6:1, 5. It dates from the Hasmonean period, 140 to 37 before Christ. A 7th century Egyptian ostracon contains a fragmentary text of the Septuagint, Greek translation 1 Ezra 2:10, 9:21, 24. A Vulgate Latin translation is found in the Codex Amiatinus, 8th century. The complete Hebrew text is found in the Aleppo Codex, 10th century, and the Leningrad Codex, 11th century. 7 alleged Persian decrees of kings or letters to and from high officials are cited in Ezra. Their authenticity is disputed. While some scholars accept them as they stand, most accept only parts of them as authentic, while others reject them entirely. Grabe has examined 6 tests against which the documents can be measured: comparative known Persian material, linguistic details, content, presence of Jewish theology, Persian attitudes towards local religions, and Persian letter-writing formulas, and concluded that all the documents are late post-Persian works and likely forgeries, but that certain features suggest a genuine Persian correspondence behind some of them. In contrast, Steiner and Williamson argue that linguistic and other evidence indicates that the documents are authentic. Thanks for watching. Subscribe to the Moses Film channel and give the video a thumbs up in support.